And that brings us to the Dutch fake God Helmet experiment. A Dutch researcher, what he did was he set up a booth at a music festival in the Netherlands. What was it called? The Lowlands Festival. And he told people that they could trip with the God Helmet. Tripping, like this is a word with a heavy hallucinogenic drug connotation to it. So he brought his subjects in, and they had a questionnaire which inquired, among other things, about how important spirituality was. And he felt that his results correlated with their interest in spirituality. Because I took a close look at his methods and his results. So he claimed that he had used a placebo helmet. And this wasn't strictly true. He, in fact, did use a mild hallucinogenic agent as part of his procedure.
Oh, really?
So, yep. What he did, now Dr. Persinger did all of his studies in acoustic silence, real silence. And what Mage did, David Mage, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly because it ends in a J. And Dutch words that use the letter J the pronunciation defies me. I spent 6 months in the Netherlands and I never quite got it. Ik begrijp geen Nederlands, which just means I don't understand any Dutch. So they sat with a helmet, and the helmet was a dummy device, but they also had headphones on, and they were given white noise to listen to. So, and they were also given a suggestion that they were going to have a profound experience. And as it turns out, the combination of suggestion and white noise is known to elicit hallucinatory experiences, primarily auditory ones. So there was one study done where subjects were given white noise to listen to, and they were told that they were going to hear Bing Crosby singing White Christmas. And when they heard Bing Crosby's voice singing that song, they should press a button. And about 1/3 of them pressed the button, even though the song was never played. So in this study, they were 14 participants out of 44 pressed the button at least once. These participants had higher scores on fantasy proneness and the Launay-Slade hallucination scale compared to participants without hallucinatory reports. Both groups did not differ in terms of imagery vividness or sensitivity to social demands, which meant that simply telling them that they were going to hear the song wasn't always enough. But so they got about 1/3. And interestingly enough, another study was done where the subjects were also told that they were going to hear White Christmas by Bing Crosby as they were given white noise to listen to. So a good number of them also indicated that they were hearing it even though it was not played. Now, the Dutch study looked at alcohol and its influence on their results. They found was the people who had been drinking responded to their procedure the same way people who had not been drinking. They didn't look at caffeine. Now, I looked this up online and I found, although the data was kind of old, I can't imagine that it's data that would change a lot. They found that your average Dutchie, as they call themselves, 3 cups of coffee a day. And what they found was that caffeine exacerbated the effects of the white noise stimulation and the suggestion that they were going to hear White Christmas. So that's quite significant. What it means is that in using white noise in lieu of actual silence, as was used in Dr. Persinger's research, they introduced a mild hallucinogenic agent. Now, in these 2 studies, we only have the effects of an auditory hallucination. But if we go to Mage's actual data, auditory phenomena, which could be agent voices, a music, a melody, or some other sound, constituted a total of
Hmm.
54 subjects, or my handwritings, or 28% of all of his subjects. He also asked them about out-of-body experiences. So for out-of-body experiences, now before I go into this, I need to say that Mage mixed his data.
Hmm.
Mage was asking about, see it, item number 2, right here, out-of-body stroke floating. So now the sensation that a person is floating has been mixed with out-of-body experiences.
Significantly different.
Significantly different, radically different. In fact, they are 2 different kinds of experiences. Lots of people study out-of-body experiences. Very few people study floating sensations, but by mixing the 2, he was able to increase the size of the effect and make his procedure look more effective than it actually was.
Right.
Now, the chart that I have in front of me right now and in front of the camera shows this is David Mage's results. Mixed with floating sensations, 8.6% of his subjects reported the phenomena, either out of body or floating. How much of it was a floating sensation and how much of it was out of body experience that we recognize as deserving of that name? We don't know. It could have been 99% of this could have been floating and 1% OBE, or it could have been 50-50. We have no way of knowing. Dr. Persinger, who defines out-of-body experiences much more rigorously, found that in the placebo condition, in the control condition in his laboratory, in one study dedicated to out-of-body experiences, 4% of his subjects had out-of-body experience in the placebo condition. Now remember, in his lab, like Mage's helmet, which had white noise, a minor hallucinogenic agent, Persinger had absolute silence and absolute darkness and complete sensory deprivation, including a Faraday cage. So there wasn't even any electromagnetic noise from circuits in other rooms. So they were in complete isolation, and 4% of his subjects had out-of-body experiences. Now that's extrapolating the rate of out-of-body experience from the rate of sensed presence experiences. Because I could not find, and Dr. Persinger had passed away, but I couldn't find an exact record for the amount of out-of-body experiences that he had in the placebo condition. But importing the placebo versus stimulation data from another study, this is about what we get, 4%. With the stimulation, an average of 32.5% of his subjects had out-of-body experiences. So this is nearly 10 times as high from stimulation to placebo.
Right.
And what is this? 4 times as high as David Mage's out-of-body experience with his so-called placebo condition. I don't know whether white noise will make an out-of-body experience more likely. I tried to find out. I couldn't find any data at all. So let's move on to another one where Mage did not mix his data and where I have not extrapolated from previous studies. And that is Dr. Persinger's lifetime interest in the sensed presence. All right, when it talked about sensing a presence, David Mage's data referred to the feeling of a presence unmixed with other data. There it is, along with my badly manicured fingernail. Using Mage's supposed placebo stimulation, 5.8% of his subjects reported sensing a presence. Now, in the acoustic chamber, in the silent chamber, in silence, darkness, and stillness, Dr. Persinger got 10% in the placebo condition. And he published this, so I'm not extrapolating from anything. But when it came to sensing a presence with the stimulation, Dr. Persinger's rate of success, rate of hit for the phenomena went up to 80%.
Incredible.
So 8 times the number of the placebo condition. The reason Dr. Persinger is able to get any kind of effects at all in the placebo condition is because his placebo conditions are designed to create the optimal conditions for an altered state experience. And in silence and darkness and stillness, there's a better chance for sensing a presence than there is in our ordinary lives. There's nothing to distract. And the people who are prone to having such an experience regularly in their lives, even if it's only occasionally, even if it isn't that often, are going to respond to the sensory deprivation alone. Mm-hmm. And then you also have to remember that if your average God's helmet session goes on for, let's say, 40 minutes, that's usually the minimum, 40 to 60 minutes. These are 2-phase sessions, and the first phase is minimum 20 minutes, and the second phase is minimum 20 minutes. The maximum is 60 minutes. So if they're going to sit in absolute silence and absolute darkness by itself, a certain percent of them, evidently 10% from the chart we just saw, they're going to have something to report. But when you add the stimulation to that, then the number goes up 8 times. So the Dutch studies placebo helmet or placebo procedure using a dummy helmet was not entirely a placebo. Looking at the entire scope of phenomena, you notice that there's a lot of hits that don't correspond to anything that we would traditionally regard as spiritual or religious. As, for example, stress, heart rate increase, hot, sweat. Where is that? Here. Itching, tingling, cold, shivering, memories of drug experiences, their mind wandering, self-referential processing. I have no idea what that means, but it does sound like people thinking about themselves and their lives. Those are not spiritual experiences. Moving down, we do have some that are genuinely forces, could be anything. Moving in surroundings, I'm not sure what that means, feeling that things around them might be moving. But then on the other hand, they were at a music festival and people were walking around. How about this one? Felt bored, doubts about the helmet, being distracted. So some of these, like space distortion and time distortion, may or may not be spiritual. Time distortion, being unable to mark the passage of time. You're in the chair for a little while and it feels like a long time. You're in it for a long time and it feels like just a few minutes. How about paralyzed? 2.2% of major subjects said they felt paralyzed. Involuntary movements. Sounds like twitching to me. Sleepiness, relaxation. Well, I wouldn't consider that to be a spiritual experience, nor would I give the same name to dizziness.
It's fairly ambiguous.
Fairly ambiguous. There are mistakes there or there are inaccuracies there. But to put together out-of-body experiences and floating, and then put them all in one pot, and then into the same pot put things like I felt hot, I felt cold, I was bored, makes the pot hold more than it was really designed to.
Yeah, I think to divide up any two distinct experiences and put them in the same category just kind of defeats the purpose of trying to accurately gauge, any of these people's experiences.
Right, but for me, the most important thing was that when we could compare apples and apples, looking at exactly the same phenomena, both in Mage's music festival study and in Dr. Persinger's laboratory, the placebo rates were about the same. If we say that Mage's effects were entirely placebo, and we look at Dr. Persinger's and we say we're talking only about the placebo condition, these have similar values. Mm-hmm. Rate for the sense presence in the placebo condition right here, whoops, was about almost twice as high as Mage's.
Mm-hmm.
But both of that pales into insignificance when we consider how large the effect was with the stimulation.
Right.
Times. And it does look like Mage did not do his homework. He didn't look to see how his rates of sense presence in a placebo condition or close to a placebo condition compared to Dr. Persinger's. And the same issue with his out-of-body rates. His rates are 8.6, but it's mixed with another one. Dr. Persinger's, we can anticipate about 4%. And for Dr. Persinger, in an out-of-body experience study with the stimulation, 32.5%. The reason that Dr. Persinger's rates come up so very differently for out-of-body as sensed presence is because the sense presence experience, feeling like there's someone there, there's someone behind you, but when you turn to look, there's no one there. This is a much more common experience. So the neural thresholds for triggering the experience are going to be much lower than it ever would be for an out-of-body experience. In fact, when I first prepared these charts, I was a little surprised at how high the out-of-body experience rates were. But then I have to remember, it was done with the stimulation. It was done in an isolated environment, a soundproof environment, and a Faraday cage, so that the people who were undergoing the experiment had the rare moment of being free of all electromagnetic influences around them. So when you put all of that together, then it looks like, then it becomes a lot less surprising. Now, one thing that I should add is that Dr. Persinger's rate with the stimulation is an average. So what is it an average of? And the answer is a little bit complicated. There are two factors that were taken into account in that study. One was how often the people had temporal lobe signs, deja vu, sense of a presence, tingly sensations, feeling of movement when they were actually keeping still, these temporal lobe signs. The high end of that average, which is not in that paper, in that sheet, because it is an average, the high end of it was significantly higher, I believe in the lower 40%. And the low end of it was in the 27% or thereabout range. So, and the other thing that he took into account was the state of the Earth's magnetic field. When the Earth's magnetic field was active and busy, the rate of OBE reportage was higher. So it's an average of two factors at once: temporal lobe sensitivity and the state of the geomagnetic field. Was it stormy, was it unsettled, or was it quiet? And in that study, when the geomagnetic field was at an elevated level, which refers to storms, stronger magnetic field, you had higher rates of out-of-body experiences. So this is my answer to the fake God Helmet study.